Let's talk about how to prepare a production cost report. So the problem says Robinson Company has the following production and manufacturing cost data for March 2020. All materials are added at the beginning of the process. We need to prepare a production cost report for the month of March. So we're given manufacturing cost information and production data for the month. We can take all of that information and prepare a production cost report. So we have that information over on the left side right now, and over on the right side is our production cost report. So we're going to first look at the column for physical units. So that's how many units were actually there in beginning work in process for this first box. So we take a look over at our production data and we see that there were 14,500 units. So we'll put that into our production cost report. Now, how many units did we start into production? That's our units started, 50,600. And then we add those together, and that gets us our total units of 65,100. Now we move down to the units accounted for, and we need to know the physical units for transferred out. Well, we're told that there were 55,300 units transferred out. That means that we finished those units and we pushed them out of the factory. We're done with them. They're gone now. What about our ending work in process? Well, so we take a look at that and it says 9,800 units, 1/5 complete. That means it's 1/5 complete as to conversion costs, right? So that's going to come later on in this process. Here we're just looking at physical units, so that's 9,800. You add those two together and you get 65,100. You'll notice that's the same as the total units that we found previously. They need to equal. Those two amounts for the total units have to be the same number. Now we'll move over a column to the right, and this is where we start figuring out our equivalent units for materials and our equivalent units for conversion costs. So let's first look at materials. How many units transferred out? That's going to stay the same. That's still the 55,300 because we've completed those fully. Ending work in process. Well, it's still the 9,800 because all the materials are already in that ending work in process. So our total units are 65,100. Now for conversion costs. Conversion costs are your labor and overhead costs. So your units transferred out, it's 55,300. Since we've completed those units fully, they are fully completed for both materials and for conversion costs. Now our ending work in process, this is where we take the 1/5 of our 9,800. So if we take 9,800 divided by 5, we will get that 1,960. Now we add our transferred out and ending work in process, and we get our equivalent units for conversion costs of 57,260. Now you'll notice those equivalent units also went into that next section under the unit cost portion. So we're finding these equivalent units, that way we can figure out unit costs here next. So now that we have those, we can just focus on the total cost row above it. So for materials, you started off with 17,600 in your beginning work in process for materials, and then you incurred another $199,000. So your total cost for materials are those two added together, and you get your $217,000. Now for conversion costs, your beginning work in process for conversion costs had 15,060. And then as I said earlier, your conversion costs are your labor and overhead. So we take that 15,000 and we add in the 67,000 for labor, and the $49,000 for your overhead, and you get a conversion cost total of $131,000. Now you add those two together, your materials and your conversion costs, and you get this $349,132. That's the total cost of this production. Now, we have our unit cost row. How are we going to find that? We take our total cost and divide it by our equivalent units. So our total cost of materials, that was $217,000. Our equivalent units for materials are 65,000. We divide those two, and we find out that each unit of materials cost $3.34. Now we do the same thing for conversion costs. We take the 131,000 divided by 57,000, and we get $2.30. Then we add up our two unit costs, and we can see that one completed unit will cost $5.64 to produce. Now we can move on to the next part. We need to know the cost to be accounted for in our work in process beginning. So our beginning work in process, that's up at the very top of our manufacturing cost information. And we see that the total in our beginning work in process is $32,000. They get that by adding together the materials and the conversion costs amounts. Now, what did we start into production? Well, this is going to be the materials, labor, and overhead that are listed below your beginning work in process. So the $199,000, the $67,000, and the $49,000. We add those three amounts together, and we see that we started into production. Manufacturing costs worth $316,000. So our total cost, if you add together what you started into production and what you had in your beginning work in process, is $349,132. You'll notice we see that number earlier as well with our total cost. So now we can move down into the cost reconciliation schedule portion. And we need to know the cost accounted for our transferred out units. So how are we going to find this? Well, we take the number of units that we transferred out. That's our 55,300. And we multiply it by the total unit cost. Because if these units were transferred out, they are 100% complete, right? So we take 55,300 times $5.64, and the units that were transferred out cost $311,000. Now for our ending work in process. This is where we're going to look back at where we first calculated our equivalent units. So for materials, we had 9,800 units in our ending work in process. We multiply that by just the materials unit cost of $3.34, and we get $32,732. Now for conversion costs, we can see that our ending work in process had 1,960 units, right? Because they were only 1/5 complete. So we take that 1,960 units times the conversion cost unit cost of $2.30, and we will get 4,508. So we add our materials and conversion cost amounts together to find that the cost in our ending work in process was $37,240. So now we have our final line on our production cost report of just our total cost. So we're going to take the cost from our transferred out, that $311,000, and add in our ending work in process cost, the $37,000, and we get $349,132. So you'll notice every single time that you had a total cost it was the same amount.